In this video, I'm going to show you how easy it can be to recreate a pattern of something you already own. For this project, we're going to need a medium weight non-stretch fabric, interfacing, a close-ended zipper, scissors, pins, thread, paper, rulers and pencils, and then whatever dress you want to recreate. The dress I picked is a little small for me, so I need to think first of the alterations I want to make. It's a little tight on the bust and it's quite short, so those are two of the things I'm going to change about this dress. By opening up the side seam under the arm, you can see that gives quite a bit more space in the bust area. So I'm going to do that for both sides, opening it up about 5 centimeters down. And here I'm just playing around to see if I want to add any darts to the dress. I do want to bring it in a little bit on the waist, and I'm just going to mark that out with pins. I'm going to put pins on either side of the fabric, so on the front piece and the back piece, so that when I detach them, I know how much to take away from each side. And then I'm also going to measure how much I've opened up the seam under the arm. And now, which can be a little bit tedious, with my seam ripper, I'm going to unstitch all of the existing seams. So for this dress, that's the 2 side seams and the 2 shoulder seams, and then I'm also going to remove the facing. Doing this can give you a lot of insight on how things are made and can give you a little bit of inspiration for your own garments. So now I'm going to place my pieces onto my paper to trace out, and I've actually decided to split my back piece into 2 because I want to do a back zipper instead of the front buttons. This just goes to show how many alterations you can make even when copying to create the exact garment you're looking for. Making sure we've included seam allowance, we can then cut out our back piece. And then for our front piece, we're just going to trace it out all as one because again, I'm not doing the front buttons. And here you can see my paper was a little bit too narrow, but I just added a little extra with some tape. It can also help to fold your pattern in half just to make sure that you're cutting it out equally on both sides. And also to use your rulers just to make sure that everything's lining up. Then the other 2 pieces I'm going to create for this pattern are the front and back facing, which I'm going to create by just tracing out the front and back pieces, and I'm going to trace it to about 5 centimeters underneath the armhole. So now I have the 4 pieces of my pattern. You don't necessarily need to take apart an existing garment to create a pattern, but it does make it a little easier when it comes to tracing. Now we're ready to cut out these pieces in our fabric. We want to make sure that we're cutting all of our pattern pieces in the same direction. And then for the back piece, we're going to flip it so we're cutting out its mirror image. So now we have our 2 back pieces and our front piece for the dress. Now we're moving on to our facing pieces, which we're going to create interfacing pieces for. So we're going to cut out these facing pieces in interfacing and our real fabric. Interfacing is something that I forget about, but it actually makes the biggest difference when you're sewing, and for the look of the garment. Now we need to iron that interfacing onto our facing pieces. I like to place a piece of scrap fabric down just so that I don't get anything on my iron. Now we're going to place right sides together of our 3 facing pieces, and we're going to sew our shoulder seams. And then we're going to do the same right sides together at the shoulder seams for our main dress pieces as well. Now with all the shoulder seams sewn, we're going to sew our neckline, so we're going to place our facing piece and our dress pieces right sides together and sew along the neckline. Then we're going to cut notches in the neckline, making sure we're not cutting any of the stitches to make sure that our fabric lies flat. For any curved pieces, it's important to do this step. Then we're going to flip it right side out and iron it down. And as you can see, our neckline is now looking pretty flat. Now laying our dress out, we're going to roll it up and attach the right side of the dress to the right side of the facing that should attach to that side of the dress, lining up the shoulder seams. And then we're going to sew that armhole. So we're just attaching armhole of the facing to the armhole of the dress with all the rest of the dress tucked in between the 2. And with that sewn, we can notch it and then pull it apart. And it should look like this. And then we can iron it out. And now we're going to do the exact same technique that we just did, but for the other side of the dress. So we're going to lay it out flat, roll up the dress, attach the right side of the dress to the right side of the facing around the piece that we just rolled. And here I'm just placing pins along the whole armhole, attaching the facing to the dress right sides together. And before we pull that apart, we want to notch that up again, while being careful not to cut any of the seams. And then pulling that apart, we can iron it again. So now our facing is attached at the armholes and the neck of our dress. The next step, we're going to attach the zipper. Whenever I'm attaching a zipper, just to make sure that everything lines up, I first like to sew the seam shut with the biggest stitch on my sewing machine to then easily remove it at the end. So with the largest stitch on my machine, I'm going to sew the whole back seam of the dress. And then I'm going to iron that seam open. Then I'm going to mark with a pin how low I want my zipper to go, which is going to be marked by the widest part of my hip to make the dress easy to put on and off. Now we're going to pin the zipper right side down onto the seam allowance of the back seam. My zipper is a little long, but I'm going to trim that later. So using my zipper foot, I'm just sewing the zipper down again to the seam allowance of the back seam. And now with the zipper in place, I can use my seam ripper to unstitch that back seam. I do find, especially with a longer zipper, that this technique really keeps everything in place and makes sure that your zipper is lying flat. Now with the zipper in place, I usually do a second stitch on my zipper because with the zipper open, you can get quite a bit closer to the zipper teeth. This is an optional step, but I just find it's a little cleaner. I'm cutting a bias strip out of a piece of fabric, and I'm going to create a bias finish on my facing. So placing right sides together, I'm going to sew the bias strip onto the edge of my facing, and then I'm going to iron that out. I only need the strip to be about 3 centimeters in width, so I just trimmed that down, folded over 1 centimeter, ironed it, and then folded it over a second time. Then I'm placing pins in the seam that I just sewed, making sure the pins are catching the fabric on the back side, and then I'm going to sew along where I pinned. I'm going to use this technique for all of the raw edges of this dress. Now I'm ready to trim my zipper, placing pins at the top before I cut it so I make sure that the zipper is not going to fall off the tracks. Now we're going to place right sides together, the back facing with the back piece of the dress, locking in that zipper. And then we're going to sew along where we pinned, and then flip it right side out. And we're going to do the exact same for both sides. I'm still placing pins at the top of the zipper because I haven't fully sewn it down yet. I'm going to create the bias strip finish on the front piece of the facing as well. Now we can attach the front and the back pieces of facing, right sides together, lining it up at the side seam, and attaching the right sides at the front and the back of the dress as well. And we're going to do the same for both sides. And then we can sew along where we pinned. This is the step I should have done before I added the zipper, but you can do it after as well. I'm going to add interfacing to the edge of the fabric that attaches to the zipper. One of the sides I added it and one of the sides I haven't yet, and you can see the structure of the piece is so much better on the side with the interfacing. So I'm just going to poke a strip of interfacing in between and use my iron to attach it. Again, it probably would have been easier if I did this before I attached the zipper. And then again, I'm going to use the bias strip technique, folding it over 1 centimeter at the edge and attach it to finish off the edge of my zipper. So here I'm just again wrapping the bias strip around the edge of my zipper. And this is what it looks like with both sides with the interfacing and both sides with the bias strips. I did the bias strip finish for all my raw edges, and now I'm ready to hem my dress. So I'm just going to fold it over 1 centimeter and then 2 centimeters and sew it with a straight stitch. The final step is I'm going to add a hook and eye to the top of the dress, which I'm going to sew with a hand stitch. And you're all done! Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked this video, please subscribe.